Today, the eyes of the entire world are turning to, of all places, Alaska. A huge, high-stakes summit is getting underway between the US and Russian presidents. And really, this meeting could reshape the future of Ukraine and, honestly, all of European security. The outcomes here range from a landmark peace deal all the way to a complete political disaster. And we're going to break down exactly what's on the line.
And if you're wondering how Kyiv is feeling, well, the mood isn't optimistic, it's downright anxious. This quote from a source right inside President Zelensky's office, it just perfectly captures this deep-seated fear that Ukraine's fate is about to be decided for them, not with them. And you have to remember the context. Russian forces are pushing hard in the Donbass, so for many in Ukraine, this summit feels like a negotiation happening completely over their heads, and at the worst possible time.
So that brings up a really interesting question, right? With the whole world watching this incredibly important meeting, why Alaska? It seems so random. And the truth is, it wasn't some grand symbolic gesture. The choice of Alaska was, believe it or not, the result of a messy process of elimination. It came down to pure logistical necessity. Yeah, picking the spot for this was a total diplomatic scramble. So first, Europe was just completely off the table. Putin couldn't risk it because of that ICC arrest warrant hanging over his head. Okay, so what about neutral ground like Vienna or Geneva? Nope, those were rejected. Putin then suggested the UAE, but the White House shot that down. They didn't want another marathon trip. So it boiled down to two options, Hungary or the US itself. And in a really surprising twist, Putin actually agreed to meet on American soil. The problem, it's peak chore season in Alaska, which left planners with literally only one option secure enough, a remote military base.
To really get what's going on at this summit, you have to understand the three key players at the heart of it all: Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, and of course, the leader whose country's fate is on the line, Volodymyr Zelensky. And let me tell you, each one is coming to this with a completely different and, frankly, conflicting agenda.
So President Trump is walking into this with just supreme confidence in his own personal deal-making skills. He truly believes he can size up the situation and cut a deal almost instantly. You can hear it in his voice. For him, this is all about ending the war fast, which would let the US pivot its strategic focus away from Europe and over towards China. It's a very personal, very transactional way of looking at it. And then you have this, a stark, powerful contrast from President Zelensky. He's sending a crystal clear message. Ukraine will not be a bargaining chip. His statement really gets to a fundamental principle of sovereignty. You know, while Trump sees a deal waiting to be made, Zelensky sees his nation's very existence being debated in a room he's not even in. And that just fuels the fear that any so-called peace could come at the cost of Ukraine's entire future. So what about Vladimir Putin? What's his angle? Well, for the Kremlin, this meeting is a huge strategic win before it even starts. Just think about it. It's a chance to shatter his diplomatic isolation, get that high-profile photo op with the U.S. president on American soil, and try to get his battlefield gains legitimized by Trump. And here's the kicker. If Kyiv rejects whatever deal they cook up, Putin can just turn around and paint Ukraine as the one blocking peace. From his point of view, it's a win-win situation. And right there, you see the core problem, don't you? It's this fundamental mismatch. They're not even playing the same game. Trump is looking for a quick exit, a fast deal. Putin is looking for a permanent, lopsided victory. One guy wants to close a chapter, the other wants to rewrite the entire book of European security to his own liking. Their goals aren't just different, they are diametrically opposed. Okay, so given these clashing agendas, how could this actually play out? A really insightful report from the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies, that's WIWIF for short, has mapped out three very distinct endgames for Ukraine, all depending on what comes out of this summit. And this framework from WiWow is so important because it shows the stakes are much bigger than just one deal. The fallout from this summit could literally push Ukraine down one of three starkly different roads, and each one has these massive, profound consequences for its future as a sovereign country. So these analysts have laid out three possible futures, and they are worlds apart. First, you could have a peace agreement that's tilted in Russia's favor. Second, a full-on Ukrainian military defeat. Or third, a long, drawn-out, protracted war. Each one means something totally different for Ukraine's territory, its sovereignty, and its security. Let's break them down one by one. Okay, scenario one. This is basically the peace deal that Kyiv is absolutely terrified of. It would mean Russia gets to keep all the territory it currently occupies. Ukraine would probably be forced to cap the size of its military, be permanently barred from joining NATO, and would have to rely on unarmed peacekeepers for its security. You can imagine how politically destabilizing that would be inside Ukraine. It could easily grant Russia the breathing room it needs to rearm Foreign Mother Go later on. Scenario 2 is the absolute nightmare outcome, a total military collapse. And this becomes a very real possibility if a failed summit leads to the US completely pulling its support and Europe can't fill that massive gap in time. If that happens, Ukraine loses its sovereignty, a puppet government gets installed in Kyiv, and the country essentially becomes a Russian military outpost, just like Belarus. That would completely rewrite the security map of Eastern Europe. And that brings us to scenario 3. This is the one that analysts think is the most likely, as things stand right now. The war just grinds on. It's a brutal war of attrition, the front lines don't really move much, Ukraine's position is definitely precarious, but it's holding on, and its survival hinges on continued Western support. At the same time, it's impressively ramping up its own weapons production, especially those highly effective drones. This is the baseline reality, the status quo, that this summit in Alaska is trying to break. So, with the US taking the lead in these talks, you have to ask, where does that leave Europe? Well, they are far from just being passive bystanders. European nations are scrambling to build up what they call strategic autonomy. They're basically trying to become a more independent security provider, both for Ukraine and for themselves. And this isn't just talk, Europe is taking some really concrete steps here. It's shifting away from just ad hoc aid packages to more permanent, long-term structures. We're seeing huge joint weapons procurement programs, like the one for 1 million artillery shells. We're seeing integrated air defenses through the Sky Shield initiative. And then you have France even floating the once unthinkable idea of extending its nuclear umbrella to other EU partners. Things are definitely chinking. And to put a really big number on that commitment, since 2022, EU member states have poured over 60 billion euros in military aid into Ukraine. This is a massive financial and industrial shift. It's a clear signal that Europe now sees itself as a principal security backer for Ukraine, no matter what happens in Washington. So as we try to figure out how this summit might go, it's just impossible not to think about the last time these two leaders met one-on-one. The memory of their 2018 meeting in Helsinki, it just looms so large, casting this long shadow over whatever happens in Alaska. I mean, this quote, it sent absolute shockwaves around the world. At that press conference, President Trump seemed to take Vladimir Putin's side, denying Russian election interference over the conclusions of his own intelligence agencies. For so many people watching, that moment is a huge cautionary tale about just how unpredictable these one-on-one meetings can be. And so, that leaves us with the one crucial question hanging over everything. Can a self-proclaimed dealmaker sitting across the table from a ruthless strategist actually forge a deal that ends a brutal war without selling out an allied nation? The answer to that question is going to have consequences that echo far, far beyond Alaska, and it's an answer the entire world is waiting for.